when you think about it, the phrase, getting a little on the side, takes on a whole new meaning when you're talking about Jesus.
You don't have to be poor anymore. Jesus is here.
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, Christianity is stupid.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude, not far from the redneck Mecca. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is headed my way. And Buttons is debating on... Nope, she's decided she's going to give herself a bath. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cats. Get over it. This is a news show episode where I cover stories in the news that are related to things like atheism, secularism, science, or I find just plain interesting. Next episode will be the Apocrypha. And again, my guest will be Skullbeard. My apologies for not getting this out until today, but my days off weren't quite as free as I thought that they'd be. Plus, I'm still having trouble adjusting to this sleep schedule that my job has me on. Work gave me a 13-pound turkey. That's about 6 kilos for you civilized folks, which was nice, but caused me some problems. I have one of those side-by-side refrigerators, and there's simply no way I could fit the damn thing inside the freezer. Another problem that it caused is there's no way I can eat the whole thing. I have trouble polishing off a small turkey breast before it goes bad. Dealing with an entire turkey isn't easy. After all, the cats and I can only eat so much of it. Well, the cats would eat a lot of it if I let them, but it's not good for them, so I don't. I tried to palm the thing off on a friend of mine, to at least get them to put it in their freezers so that it could be served at the Democratic Party's Christmas party. They didn't want it, and since they're one of the people on the board of the local party, if they weren't keeping it, it wasn't going to be served. All of which meant I had to cook it on Thanksgiving, since it had thawed out sitting in my fridge. Originally, I was just going to do a standard Thanksgiving-style dinner, but then I thought about it. If I'm going to wind up throwing most of it out anyways, why not experiment? So I did. On those rare occasions I have steak, I often put a spicy rub on it. The recipe I based my rub on says that it's good for poultry, and I figured I'd try it out on the turkey. Then I decided to really mix it up a bit, and instead of sticking the usual veggies of carrots, onions, and potatoes in the bag with the turkey, I threw in some bell peppers to go along with the onions while scrapping the carrots and the potatoes. I made spicy mashed potatoes, spicy green bean casserole, chorizo, and cornbread stuffing, and for the gravy, I used what is claimed to be the original KFC recipe gravy that they stopped using back in the late 60s, all of which meant that I was cooking up a storm, not to mention I had to go back to the store a couple of times in order to get some ingredients I'd forgotten about. How did it turn out? Well, the meal largely worked except for the stuffing. It came out fine, but the flavors didn't mesh well with everything else. This morning, I mixed some of the dressing in with my scrambled eggs along with some salsa and cheese. That was really good. I still have to finish cleaning up the mess in the kitchen, and I'm probably going to be spending the next day or so carving up the turkey as best I can in order to freeze as much as possible. Still, I'm sure the cats will be getting a bunch of it as well, much to their delight, or at least Buttons. Fuzznuts is not terribly fond of human food for some reason. Alright. Since I'm sure none of you want to hear how sad my life is, let's get to the news.
Everybody needs something to believe in, don't they, Reverend?
Bow down thine ear, O Lord, and hear me, for I am poor and needy. Preserve my soul, for I am holy. O thou my God, save thy servant that trusteth in thee. Save him from this big-mouthed coos with a motor-driven ass who... Forgive me, Lord. I speak not in vain, but this little bitch provokes me so.
Oh, Jesus. At least I can stay in character.
From Guardian.com. Church of Sweden to stop referring to God as He or Lord. The Church of Sweden is urging its clergy to use gender-neutral language when referring to the supreme deity, refraining from using terms such as Lord and He in favor of the less specific God. The move is one of several taken by the National Evangelical Lutheran Church in updating a 31-year-old handbook setting out how services should be conducted in terms of language, liturgy, hymns, and other aspects. Translation: people aren't buying our fairy tale anymore, so we'll change superficial details in hopes that they stop noticing what kind of horror show it really is. Making a supreme being genderless or gender neutral works when you're talking about some kind of abstract God. You know, like, the energy of the cosmos is what we call God. The authors of the Bible really go out of their way to make sure that people know they think God has a penis. I also want to point out that the evangelical in the name of the church is a bit of a misnomer. These are the milquetoast Lutherans made famous by a Prairie Home Companion. Not whacked out fundy types most people think of when they hear the term evangelical. There are Lutherans like that, but they are members of the Missouri Synod and are generally only found in the U.S., so don't think that this is some kind of breakthrough. It's just bland white people being even whiter and blander. From stuff.co.nz, Destiny Church charities to be removed from Charities Register after failing to file annual returns. Destiny Church has slammed the Charities Registration Board as incompetent after receiving notice 2 of its charities would be stripped of their tax-exempt status. The board announced the move, which would come into effect on December 20th on Wednesday. The 2 charities are Destiny International and Tihani o Nagaya Mara Wow. I don't know. I really don't even care. These are fucksticks. Holdings Limited. Board Chairman Roger Holmes Miller said both had failed to meet their obligations under the Charities Act and would be deregistered. Who knew that the Kiwis had the same kind of dirtbag prosperity gospel preachers as the U.S.? Meanwhile, in the U.S., there's pretty much nothing a church can do to have its charitable status revoked, so I guess that puts New Zealand one up on us. For all the talk about Trump getting rid of Scientology's tax-exempt status, we have yet to see any action on that. This next story comes from CBSNews.com. Formerly home of the groper Charlie Rose. Golly. Pope Francis gets a special edition Lamborghini. Luxury sports car maker Lamborghini has presented Pope Francis with a brand new special edition Huracan that will be auctioned off with the proceeds donated to charity. Lamborghini officials presented the sleek white car with yellow gold detailing to Francis on Wednesday in front of the Vatican Hotel where he lives. The Pope promptly blessed it. Of course he did. Some of the funds raised from the Sotheby's auction will go to rebuilding Christian communities in Iraq devastated by the Islamic State group. The Vatican said Wednesday that the aim is to allow displaced Christians to, quote, finally return to their roots and recover their dignity, unquote. I'm not touching a lot of the implications of that. But there is something funny about a German-owned car company donating a high-performance sports car to a pope from South America. You know, where all the Nazis fled. I also like how only some of the funds raised will go to helping people. What's the rest of the money going to go for? Some of it, no doubt, will be fees charged by the auction house, but from the way the article reads, it doesn't look like the entire sum the church is going to be getting will go to helping Christian Iraqis. I also have to wonder how much rebuilding they'll be able to do with the money. The car retails for about $200,000. It'll certainly go for more than that at auction, but even if it clears $1 million after fees, that's barely a drop in the bucket to what's needed in Iraq, even in a small community. And it's not like the church is exactly hurting for money. Estimates have the Vatican's assets at as high as $20 billion, which doesn't include their annual income from donations, countless works of art, historical documents, and potentially other sources of income. They could quite easily drop $1 billion in Iraq and not miss the money. Shit, if the church was serious about raising money to help people, there's an easy way they could do it and rake in billions of dollars. The church has a metric fuck ton of art and other historical artifacts. Just package up a small percentage of that and send it on a traveling exhibit around the world. Lots of people would pay money to see the stuff, and the money raised could go to helping people. You know, like all those kids who've been raped by priests. That's a win-win for the church. They get to keep their art, raise money to help people, and get lots of good PR for doing so. Unless, of course, they're worried that when folks see the kinds of things owned by the church, they'll start to wonder if the money they've been donating has actually gone to anything other than buying art. This story comes from Newsweek, and it's probably the juiciest one in the religion section this week. Meet Faithleaks, religion's response to Wikileaks. And no, that doesn't mean they've got an albino hiding in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. A self-styled muckraking site, which that's a slur, and these guys are actually trying to do legitimate work, I want to point out, that uncovered shady financial dealings and enemy lists inside the Mormon Church, now says it is coming for all organized religions. Mormon Leaks, the Nevada-based nonprofit that leaks secrets from inside the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is similar to Wikileaks, the nonprofit website that publishes leaked documents from anonymous sources. Faithleaks, which encourages people to leave anonymous tips about corruption and abuse inside all religious organizations, launched Tuesday with the goal of rooting out abuse, its founders say. Increased transparency results in less corruption and less abuse in any organization, Faithleaks co-founder Ryan McKnight said in a news release. It provides the same service of anonymizing sources from all religions, religious nonprofits, cults, and creeds with documented information they believe deserves to be made public. While that's a nicely generic kind of statement, it's fairly obvious that the guys running the organization are atheists looking to expose the bullshit goes on behind the scenes in religion. I have to wonder if it's not being run by that friend of heretic woman who was doing a lot to expose the Mormon Church last year. Interestingly, the article specifically mentions that the group has been contacted by Scientologists and Jehovah's Witnesses, two very cultish religions. One has to wonder what kinds of things they're going to be revealing in the future. And it's kind of glossed over in the article, but I need to mention this in case anybody out there listening to this happens to have some information. The site uses a protocol developed by folks in the national, like a lot of the major news organizations. After The Guardian did their release of the Snowden papers, they realized they had to have a way for people to get them information without it being easy for anybody to trace back who submitted that information. So they came up with a particular protocol, I forget the name of it, and that's what this site uses, and that's what a lot of the other sites out there that ask for anonymous tips on things like corruption in government, people being harassed in the workplace, things like that. They use that protocol because even under a court order, the technology does not exist for them to reveal who gave them that information.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
Asps. Very dangerous. You go first.
From NationalGeographic.com, we have ancient Greek masterpiece revealed on thumb-sized gem. A stunning work of art etched on a gemstone no larger than 1.5 inches was revealed after researchers washed away thousands of years of limestone and grime. The team of researchers first found the masterpiece 2 years ago, but they had regarded it as little more than a small bead. It was in a collection of 1,400 artifacts unearthed in the 3,500-year-old tomb of a Bronze Age warrior buried in southwest Greece. The stone, which researchers have now dubbed the Pylos combat agate, would have likely been used as a small piece of jewelry, said Sherry Stocker, one of the dig leaders. The tomb itself was a remarkable find when researchers discovered it in 2015. It housed the well-preserved skeleton of the Griffin warrior. He was buried with a plaque depicting a creature called a griffin, with the head and wings of an eagle and the body of a lion. Among the burial riches found with the Griffin warrior were a collection of gold signet rings and a bronze sword. The gemstone was collected but put aside, and its artistry was only revealed after a routine artifact cleaning. This is one of those times where you just have to go to the article and see the pics. If somebody had carved the agate today, we'd think it was amazingly beautiful. But it was done in an era before magnifying glasses had been invented. It's amazingly detailed and so tiny. Those of you who've been listening for a while might remember that about 2 years ago I talked about a Celtic tomb found in France, which also had some stunningly beautiful objects in it. I was rather amazed that anyone in that time period could make such finely detailed objects. This carving is 1,000 years older than the things found in the Celtic tomb. Whomever made it must have been insanely talented, and I don't know how they could have done it. From JewishPress.com, 1,300-pound lioness statue discovered near the Kinneret. The relief statue of a lioness carved into a basalt rock was recently discovered in a pile of debris that had been evacuated by a tractor from the Beit Habek excavation site by the northern Kinneret. It is estimated that the statue was placed at the entrance to a Jewish synagogue that operated there, or at the entrance to another significant structure from the time. The site was known as the Lost Roman City of Julius, formerly the village of Bethsaida, which according to Christian tradition was home of Jesus' apostles Peter, Andrew, and Philip. The age of the statue is estimated at more than 2,000 years. Two researchers who were touring the area noticed in one of the dirt piles... Wow, that's a horribly written sentence. Two researchers who were touring the area noticed in one of the dirt piles removed by the tractor an unusual-looking stone. As they approached it and cleaned it up a little, they noticed the outline of a lion. The archaeologists Mark Turnag and Eli Shukran contracted the director of excavations at the site on behalf of the Kinneret Academic College, Dr. Mordecai Aviam, who arrived at the scene. It turned out to be a magnificent statue of a carved lioness in a large basalt block weighing 1,320 pounds, Dr. Aviam related, and I'm surprised they didn't use kilograms. With quick effort, a truck with a crane was brought over, and with careful, painstaking work, the statue was raised, loaded onto the truck, and transported to safety. Judging by the photographs, the statue is about life-size. I also have to say that it isn't nearly as detailed as the agate from the previous story. It looks like something Picasso would have carved, and isn't nearly as realistic looking as the agate bead. I have to wonder why such an adornment would be in front of a synagogue. And that noise you hear is buttons and fuzznuts chasing each other around the house. Forget the whole "thou shalt not make any graven image" stuff from the Ten Commandments, which this is a clear violation of. Why would they pick a lioness as a decoration? The article says that similar statues from other synagogues from that time period have been found before this. So it's not hugely unusual, but the article doesn't say why they would have done this, and I can't think of any Old Testament stories to which this might be applicable. From ScienceNews.org. Skeletons could provide clues to who wrote or protected the Dead Sea Scrolls. A decades-long debate over who once occupied a settlement located near the caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found has taken a chaste turn. Analysis of 33 newly excavated skeletons of people buried at the West Bank site, Qumran, supports a view that the community consisted of a religious sect of celibate men. Anthropologist Yossi Nagar of the Israel Antiquities Authority in Jerusalem presented the findings November 16th at the annual meeting of the American Schools of Oriental Research. Preliminary radiocarbon dating of one of the Qumran bones indicates that the interred bodies are around 2,200 years old, close to the same age as the ancient text, which are estimated to have been written around 150 BC and AD 70. Plus re-examination of 53 previously unearthed human skeletons from Qumran Cemetery, now housed in France, found that 6 of 7 individuals formerly tagged as women were actually men, Nagar said. A small number of children have also been excavated at Qumran. No word on what their gender was. Israel Antiquities Authority anthropologists Hanani Hazimi and Yevgeny Aronovich, I guess that's how you pronounce their last name, directed the latest excavations at Qumran in 2016. The researchers called in Nagar to study the skeletons. He identified 30 of the newly excavated individuals as definitely or probably males based on factors that include pelvic shape and body sizes. There was not enough evidence to assign a sex to the remaining 3. At the time of their deaths, the men ranged in age from around 20 to 50 or more, Nagar estimated. Now, if this was a monastic site, you have to wonder what that lone woman was doing there, if they actually correctly identified that skeleton as belonging to a woman. The article says that they're going to be doing DNA tests on the remains to nail down the gender of all of them. What the article doesn't mention, and I have to wonder about, is if the society didn't have some kind of rule which stipulated that men and women have to be buried in separate cemeteries. That wouldn't necessarily be out of character for a strongly religious group. Additionally, we know that the group at Qumran had some very strict beliefs. So strict, in fact, that we're left with some puzzling questions. Like, how did they shit on the Sabbath? We have questions about this because they had very strict rules as to how far you could walk on the Sabbath, but their latrines were placed beyond that limit. To my knowledge, nobody's found anything like a chamber pot, and the rules seem to have specified that they not defecate in or near the home. Now, in one of the great courses I listened to that dealt with the sect at Qumran, I think they talked about the group having strict rules as far as men and women goes. And I know there's speculation that they were a sect that had fled Jerusalem when the city was sacked by the Romans at some point. I don't know if it was in 70 or... No, it was before that. I don't remember when it was. But that's how they think the group got started at Qumran, and if that's the case, and they're fleeing from, violence in the city, you would think that women would be brought along with men. So, again, I think there may actually be a cemetery out there that is just women only. I could be wrong.
Maybe it's a little early. Maybe the time is not quite yet. But those other worlds, promising untold opportunities, beckon. Silently, they orbit the sun, waiting.
From spaceflightnow.com, an interstellar interloper is dashing through our solar system. Astronomers say an object observed speeding through our solar system last month has an unexpected cigar-like shape and originated from another star, making it the first confirmed interstellar asteroid. The asteroid was first detected October 19th by the University of Hawaii's Pan-STARRS 1 telescope on Halakala I guess that's how you pronounce it, Hawaii, as it scanned the sky to search for near-Earth objects for NASA. Calculations suggested it might be an interstellar interloper, and scientists announced Monday that they have confirmed it came from outside our solar system. Designated 1L 2017 U1, nicknamed Umau, keep wanting to go Papa Umau, a Hawaiian word for messenger or scout. The object appears reddish in color and has an elongated shape. The thing is an oddball, said Karen Meach from the University of Hawaii's Institute for Astronomy, leader of an international team studying Umau. What we found was a rapidly rotating object, at least the size of a football field, that changed in brightness quite dramatically. This change in brightness hints that Umau could be more than 10 times longer than it is wide, something which has never been seen in our own solar system. Two things that pop into my head when I read this. The first is Arthur C. Clarke's Rendezvous with Rama, which is about a giant cylindrical alien spacecraft which passes through our solar system. The second thing which pops into my head is the giant log from Star Trek IV, which shows up to talk to the whales. A group of astronomers are racing against the clock to try and put together a proposal to get a probe to Umau before it leaves the solar system. Time's against them, as the thing's already headed out towards interstellar space. If we had detected it when it was inbound, they'd have a little bit more time. Presently, it's traveling over twice the speed of New Horizons, which had the fastest speed at launch of any probe sent from Earth. Voyager 1 is traveling faster than New Horizons by a few thousand miles an hour, but this is because it was able to pick up speed thanks to slingshotting itself around planets like Jupiter. It may not be possible for any probe we launch to do that to catch up to Umau. The reason for this is that all the planets in the solar system sit roughly on the same plane. Or, to put it another way, they're all in orbit around the sun's equator. This object is acting like a stone being skipped on the surface of a pond. It came from galactic north, was pulled by the sun's gravity so that it passed below the sun's south pole, and is now heading out of the solar system again in the direction of galactic north. Getting a probe launched at the same kind of speeds as New Horizons, then slingshotting it around various planets to boost its velocity, is tricky enough when you're dealing with things like orbital mechanics in just a horizontal plane. But when you have to go vertical, that adds another layer of complexity to it. For starters, Umau will be at Jupiter's orbit by May of next year. Then it'll be as far from the sun as Saturn is by January of 2019. But that's above the plane of the solar system. So unlike some of the other probes we've launched, it may not be possible to slingshot one to intercept this asteroid around more than one planet. There's a whole host of complexities involved with it, and I'm not smart enough to be able to work out the math to figure out if it can be done easily. The hardware might actually not be all that tough to come up with. NASA builds complete duplicates of every probe they launch. This is so that they have a physical model to work with when they troubleshoot a problem. I'm not sure, but I think that they might build more than one duplicate of each probe. In any case, they could certainly cannibalize the duplicate of New Horizons for use on such a mission. This could make things difficult if they have to troubleshoot New Horizon when it gets to its next stop in 2019. But in theory, they could build another duplicate while they're prepping the probe to Umau. This also wouldn't be all that unique for NASA to do. The Mars Phoenix lander was built doing something similar. Of course, the odds of NASA or any other space agency actually doing this are pretty much nil. And I have to say, I don't think that if Hillary or Bernie had been elected president, things would be any different. Sorry, but the last president we had who was truly supportive of the space program was LBJ, and he's been dead for over 40 years. It's a shame, too, because this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to study something which comes from outside the solar system. And there's no telling what kinds of things we might be able to learn from it. Another amazing thing is that we have no idea where this object came from. If you follow its path back, it would appear to have come from the star Vega. But that's impossible, because at the time which the object would have been in that vicinity, Vega wasn't there. Which means that it most likely came from someplace beyond that. For all we know, this could have come from outside the galaxy. It's possible that we might be able to figure out the age of the object if we got a probe to examine it. This would enable us to figure out where it most likely came from. We are a damn short-sighted species. Now, for a slightly happier story, we have this from Engadget.com. NASA goes back to the Middle Ages for its rover tire design. The Mars Curiosity rover has been a big success, but NASA's modern tech couldn't save its tires from breaking down in the harsh conditions of Mars. For future missions, the agency has gone back to the age of knights. Based on the principles of chainmail armor, the super elastic tires can withstand more deformation than any other non-pneumatic tire. At the same time, they could potentially withstand extraplanetary abuse and provide better traction for next-generation rovers. Curiosity's wheels have taken a lot of damage because they don't have much give, and Mars rocks can be particularly jagged. NASA's new chainmail type material, on the other hand, provides a lot more flexibility while still being difficult to penetrate. In another configuration, the material could also be useful to NASA as an all-purpose lightweight heat and debris shield for orbiting aircraft. It's not just the chainmail style configuration that makes the tires work, though. They're also built from alloys like nickel titanium that can deform up to 10% deformation without losing their shape. That was badly worded, guys. The use of a nickel titanium shape memory alloy yield a super elastic tire that is virtually impervious to plastic deformation, according to the team at NASA's Glenn Research Center, named after astronaut and Senator John Glenn, who passed away this past year. And it had that name for, since like the 80s, so they didn't rename it just in honor of him. Essentially, the tires are springs. NASA hasn't said if they'll be used on the next Mars rover or not, but if they work, then NASA could not only send them to Mars, but to places like the Moon. I'm not entirely certain they will work, however. The soil in places like the Moon and Mars is really different than what we have on Earth. Thanks to things like wind and water, even the roughest rocks on Earth are smoother than what you find on the Moon and Mars. The dust, which both bodies are covered with, is particularly abrasive. Far harsher than anything we can make here on Earth. Curiosity's wheels have been wearing down faster and in unexpected ways than NASA had estimated. One of the wheels has a hole in it, which totally stunned the folks at JPL. If I were NASA, I'd contact the folks planning on sending a rover to the Moon in the next few years. Since NASA isn't going to be doing that anytime soon, from what I've been able to tell by Googling, and offer those folks a set of these wheels for their rovers. This would give them a very good idea of how they'd work on Mars. It'd really suck ass to send a rover all the way to Mars only to find out that the wheels crap out on you a week after you got there. For a truly humorous story, though, we have this from the WashingtonPost.com. A flat earther's plan to launch himself in a homemade rocket just hit a speed bump. A California man who planned to launch himself 1,800 feet high Saturday in a homemade scrap metal rocket in an effort to prove that the Earth is flat said he is postponing the experiment after he couldn't get permission from a federal agency to conduct it on public land. Instead, Mike Hughes said the launch will take place sometime next week on private property, albeit still in Amboy, California, an unincorporated community in the Mojave Desert along historic Route 66. It's still happening. We're just moving it 3 miles down the road, Hughes told the Washington Post on Friday. This is what happens anytime you have to deal with any kind of government agency. Hughes claimed that the Bureau of Land Management said he couldn't launch his rocket as planned Saturday in Amboy. He claimed the federal agency had given him verbal permission more than a year ago, pending approval from the Federal Aviation Administration. A BLM spokesman said its local field office had no record of speaking with Hughes and that he had not applied for the necessary special recreation permit to hold an event on public land. Someone from our local office reached out to him after seeing some of these news articles about the launch because that was news to them, BLM spokeswoman Samantha Storm said. Representatives from the FAA did not immediately respond to requests for comments Friday. One thing that I want to point out, which is buried in the story, is that this guy may not actually be a flat earther at all. Until fairly recently, he billed himself as a common man, trying to show that you didn't need to be a billionaire to build rockets. Back in 2014, when he flew in a similar death trap, he mentioned nothing about being a flat earther. It was only when his fundraiser on Kickstarter netted him a mere $300 did he suddenly switch to being a flat earther. Once he did that, he was able to raise $8,000. The rocket cost him more than that, but how much more, I don't know. I have to wonder if the whole thing isn't some kind of elaborate scam. For starters, the rocket is only going up about 1,800 feet or 600 meters. For those of you who use civilized measures, which won't really prove shit, other than a wanker can hurl himself that high into the sky in a home-built craft, which people do all the time. Given where he's planning on launching from, he could, in theory, see the curvature of the Earth. Not that it would convince him, if he really is a flat earther, because airplanes routinely fly much higher than that. Next is that he doesn't seem to have spoken to the FAA. They kind of have regulations about who can do what, and if you fly an aircraft that they haven't certified, they tend to slap you with fines. There's no numbers on his rocket in any of the pictures I've seen, which means that he hasn't had the FAA look at it and license it. Even ultralight planes have aircraft numbers on them. I wouldn't be at all surprised if he got arrested before he tried to take off, or arrested if he manages to survive the landing.
But you blinded me with silence. She blinded me with silence.
From BBC.com, Galapagos finches caught in act of becoming new species. Hey, Ken Ham, did you hear that? A population of finches on the Galapagos has been discovered in the process of becoming a new species. This is the first example of speciation that scientists have been able to observe directly in the field. Researchers followed the entire population of finches on a tiny Galapagos island called Daphne Major for many years, and so they were able to watch the speciation in progress. The research was published in the journal Science. The group of finch species to which the big bird population belongs are collectively known as Darwin's finches and helped Charles Darwin to uncover the process of evolution by natural selection. In 1981, the researchers noticed the arrival of a male of a non-native species, the large cactus finch. Professors Rosemary and Peter Grant noticed that this male proceeded to mate with a female of one of the local species, a medium ground finch producing fertile young. Almost 40 years later, the progeny of that original mating are still being observed and number around 30 individuals. This new species of finch isn't mating with the existing species already on the island. Apparently, their songs are different enough that they can't communicate. And, as pretty as they might sound, birdsong, basically it boils down to, hey baby, what the fuck? These birds are also larger and have a diet different than the other finches on the island. And that's the big bird mentioned in the article. They're called Big Bird. I don't know if it's an homage to the Sesame Street character or not. Now, of course, fucksticks like Ken Ham will equivocate and say that this doesn't disprove or prove anything, as they're not changing from a bird into a dinosaur or getting smarter. That's kind of to be expected from such idiots. From space.com, we have this. Losing darkness, satellite data shows global light pollution on the rise. Around the globe, in both developed and developing nations, Earth's night skies are being filled with artificial light more and more each year, according to a new study. Using data from an Earth-observing weather satellite called SUMI NPP, the new study shows that between 2012 and 2016, artificially lit regions on Earth increased in brightness by 2.2%. In addition, the total area where artificial lighting appeared also increased by 2.2%, providing an illustration of humanity's expansion into previously undeveloped areas, or people in places that didn't have electricity getting electricity. So it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody moved from the city to a remote area. It could be that there were already people in a remote area, and for the first time they got solar-powered lights. When broken down by country, the results show that in many developing nations, the increases in artificial lighting are well above the global average as more people gain access to electricity and outdoor lighting equipment for highways, city centers, and residential areas. The article goes on to state that what was most surprising to experts was the increase in brightness in areas like the U.S. It was thought by switching to LED lights and better lighting designs, the brightness over the U.S. would decrease. After all, one of the advantages of LED lights over conventional bulbs is that you can make their output more directional and thus get away with a dimmer light. They were also somewhat misled by previous satellite imagery as LEDs put out more light in the blue end of the spectrum, which is harder for most satellites to pick up. This has to do with the shorter wavelength of the light. What they didn't think about, however, is the fact that since LED lights are now dirt cheap and use very little electricity, more people would be buying them and sticking them in places which were previously dark. When I had to rebuild the stairs for my deck a few years ago, I stuck solar-powered lights in all the steps and railings to make it easy to see the steps at night. The lights were only about $1 a piece, so it wasn't all that expensive to do it. Unfortunately, they only worked for about a year, and I haven't had the money to replace them. The increase in lights, however, is what's known as Jevons paradox. It is named after a 19th century economist who noticed that as steam engines got more efficient, the demand for coal increased. One would think that the demand would go down. The reason for the increase is that as it became cheaper to run a steam engine, people began expanding the use for steam engines. So, for example, you'd have a factory which had one giant steam engine which ran most of the equipment. When higher efficiency steam engines became available, people began to use them to power more things in the factory. The lower operating costs also meant the companies could make things cheaper and sell them at a lower price, which increases demand, requiring them to run the factories longer or build new factories, thus increasing the demand for more steam engines and coal. What's going to be interesting is how traffic in the U.S. changes in the next 10 or so years when companies like Uber and Lyft roll out their fleets of self-driving cars. One of the things that I think you'll see happening is that traffic on the road will increase rather than decrease. Why? Well, elderly people who are often hesitant to drive will have an easy way of getting around. You'll also see people taking trips to places, and at times they wouldn't normally do so. I know lots of people refuse to go to places during rush hour because traffic is such a hassle. If they're not driving, then they don't have to worry about how bad the traffic is. They can just stare at their phone for the whole trip. And if the cost of riding in an automated Uber or Lyft is cheaper than taking a cab or the bus, people will be more likely to do it on impulse rather than waiting to do it when they need something from multiple stores in the shopping center. It won't be, I'll wait until I've got to go get groceries. It'll be, hey, I need this thing, so I'll just call a Lyft and run to the store to get it. That might sound silly to those of you who have a car or don't have to watch your money closely, but speaking from experience, I can tell you that this is something you think about when you're financially strapped or you have to walk everywhere. I do it all the time.
You'll bring them death, and they will love him for it.
Okay, before I get to the political news, and there's a lot of it out there, I want to discuss something which was inspired by a topic on one of the podcasts I listen to. Those of you who are fans of the Scathing Atheist podcast no doubt caught last week's episode where the gang did a segment called Headlines from an Alternate Universe. This is because they're out of the country and couldn't have timely stories for the show. So they did a funny bit on what it might be like to live in a world where Hillary had won the election. It was pretty funny and certainly a needed source of amusement in a world which has been described as every day being a new 9/11. After all, no matter how much we might enjoy Shakespeare, we still all need to see somebody get kicked in the crotch in some dumb YouTube video every now and then. A few things about it struck me, however, and that's what I want to address. The first is that they assumed if Trump had lost the election, he would have just accepted that loss and moved on. I don't think that's the case, though. Trump loves attention, and if he'd have lost the election, he almost certainly would have filed lawsuit after lawsuit over it. Additionally, the Republicans in Congress would have launched any number of investigations over the election and Benghazi. I'm sure at least one of them also would have filed articles of impeachment against Hillary as well, because, she's got a vagina. I also don't think that the Nazis would quietly slink off. They were energized by Trump just because he ran. A contested loss by Trump might have them out in the streets still. For her part, Hillary would largely be confined to doing things by executive order, since Congress wouldn't be willing to pass any of the kinds of bills that she'd want to sign. She'd also be dealing with all the various lawsuits and investigation that would be thrown at her, making it difficult for her to concentrate on running the country. One thing I do agree with what the Scathing Atheist gang said is that all of us would no doubt be a lot more relaxed. We'd bitch and moan about what the Republicans were doing, but I doubt if you'd see as many Americans taking to the streets to support Hillary or bombarding their congresspeople with phone calls, faxes, emails, and the like. After all, Hillary probably wouldn't try to be getting rid of the fucking net neutrality. Now, as much as I hate Trump, if his election was the only way to get so many Americans to actually pay attention to their government, then maybe we're better off with Trump and all the horrors he's unleashed than we would be if Hillary had gotten elected. Because what we're seeing really should be the bare minimum of citizen attention being paid to the government, regardless of who is in power. None of us should be idly standing by as our government goes about its business. Even if we agree with what our elected officials are doing, we should be regularly engaging with them. Prior to Trump's election, most of us probably were not. That was our mistake. We allowed ourselves to become jaded, to not pay attention to what was happening in Washington and elsewhere. Most of us just had the attitude of, fuck it, I've got more important things to do, and they won't listen to me anyway. That's the wrong way to run a country. And I hope that going forward, all of us continue to pay as much, if not more, attention to the government as we have done since Trump was elected. I will also throw out a counter possibility. After all, one of the nice things about what ifs is that you can just toss around any kind of idea which pops into your head with equal validity. It's entirely possible that had Hillary won the election, this would have so energized women in our society that they became equally involved in politics as they are now doing. It's also possible that the obstructionism of the Republicans would have so sickened everyone that you'd see the same kind of uptick in activism that we have now. I don't know. I do know that Alex Huxley was right when he said eternal vigilance is not only the price of liberty, eternal vigilance is the price of human decency. It might be more comfortable for all of us to relax and mostly ignore politics when we get a president in office whom we largely support and agree with. But as we barrel towards whatever fate awaits us in the Trump era, let us hope that regardless of what happens, we take this as a lesson and never become so jaded again. And for all our sakes, vote in every election and do what you can to make your voice heard, no matter how futile it might seem. Okay, now for some political news. I'm going to skim briefly over the scandals involving Roy Moore and Al Franken, since most of you out there are already aware of them. If you are at all shocked by people like the governor of Alabama saying that while they believe the allegations against Moore, they still intend on voting for him, then I urge you again to read The True Believer by Eric Hoffer. What they are doing is no different than the people who are horrified by the sex scandals coming out of the Catholic Church, but still donate money to the church. Their identity is so tied up with their political ideology or their religion that they cannot abandon it for a moment without risking their sense of self. As for those people who deny the accusations despite all the evidence which has come out, this is no different than the people who refuse to accept the fact that the distance between Egypt and Israel is but about 11 days walking, and not the 40 years that it took the Israelites according to the Bible. Getting these people to change their minds isn't easy and isn't going to happen by shoving facts and figures in their faces. You have to come at it from an angle which they don't suspect. Don't try to get them to vote for the Democrat. Try to get them to not vote for either candidate. That in and of itself is a victory. Less than an ideal one, but you can hardly expect people to give up on a deeply seated religious belief, for that's what politics is to most people, easily, or in a single event, or in an instant. Those of us who were raised religious know that it wasn't a single event which tipped us over into atheism. It was a string of events which led up to that moment, some directly connected and others not directly connected. As for Al Franken, I'm on record as having said that I'm not a big fan of celebrities getting into politics. Partly it's because that all too often they tend to subscribe to some batshit theories like Oliver Stone, Gwyneth Paltrow, Jim Carrey, and so many others do. But also because their celebrity status outshines whatever abilities they might have as a politician or how right they might be on a subject. I'm sure all of us know someone who's a big fan of a particular celebrity and absolutely love whatever that celebrity does, no matter what anyone else thinks about it. So a person who'd normally be opposed to an idea suddenly becomes a big supporter of it once their celebrity crush comes out in favor of it. We want people engaging with the government who understand how it works and what the issues are, not because their favorite actor or whomever told them to. All that being said, I do not know what to make about the allegations against Franken. Roger Stone, who's pretty much the embodiment of evil these days and has close ties to Trump, hinted at the allegations before they were made public. Does that mean it's all a political con? I don't know. I'm loath to condemn either Franklin or his accusers in this situation. I just don't have enough information on the subject to decide. I will say that to Franklin's credit, he's apologized and asked for an ethics investigation, which is more than many other politicians would do. I'll also point out that the accusations against him aren't nearly as grave as those against Trump or Moore. I don't know, but I have to wonder if the explosion of allegations we've been seeing are a direct result of Trump getting elected. I don't mean that people are taking out their anger over Trump on people in the sense that they think since they couldn't stop Trump from being elected, they'll get this other bastard. I mean that with the election of Trump, they realized people have to take a stand on such matters and not turn a blind eye to it, as all of us have done. Because each of us out there has heard stories of things like the casting couch in Hollywood, even if we've never known anybody who was a celebrity or told stories like that. We know the term casting couch and what it implies. We've seen how hard it is for Bill Cosby's victims to get him held accountable. We know that guys like Roman Polanski, Rob Lowe, and others have all been involved with underage women. We know guys like Mel Gibson have been abusive to women, or that Tom Cruise and John Travolta are deeply involved in an unsavory religion. But like the reporters at the Boston Globe who started investigating child abuse scandals in the Catholic Church, having all that information in our heads wasn't enough to get us to realize that there was a real problem here. Somehow we managed to find a way to ignore it, to think that it wasn't all that serious because if it was, somebody would be doing something about it. Then when Trump got elected, lots of us realized that even if the information is out there, plain as day, it's not going to stop unless we raise our voices on the subject. So when Rose McGowan tweeted out that she'd been raped by Weinstein, it opened the floodgates, not only on accusations but on people realizing that we have to take this shit seriously and that boys being boys wasn't a very good excuse for the behavior that had been going on. As for my own part, when I heard the accusation against Weinstein, I assumed his actions were along the lines of, if you want to be able to work in this town, then you're going to have sex with me. As article after article has made clear, that wasn't the case at all. Weinstein thought that he owned those women and could do with them as he wished, when he wanted. He broke into their homes and their hotel rooms to assault them. Hopefully, he'll be behind bars soon. To come back to Franken for a moment, I don't know what he should do. He's not up for re-election until 2021, and who knows what the political landscape will be like by then. I'm not sure if he should resign or not. There are a group of people calling for him to resign, and I understand their reasons for it. At the same time, if this is a political hit job, which it could be, and even if this one is not, let me just interrupt this for a moment here. We'll assume for the moment that the stories about Franken are true. Come next year and come 2020, we are going to see a plethora of stories coming out about politicians running for office, accusing them of sexual harassment, assault, what have you. Some of these will no doubt be true, but I guarantee you there are going to be unethical people who are going to create fraudulent stories in order to knock somebody out of the race. And it's going to be people on all sides of the political spectrum. And I guarantee you that, because what's going to happen come primary season in 2018 is you're going to have Tea Party types running against Republicans in the primaries. So a Republican who's running for re-election is going to be primaried in some districts. Guarantee you that at least one of those Tea Party types will fabricate an accusation that the incumbent they're primarying sexually harassed them. Guarantee you, it'll be a false allegation, and we're going to have to see what happens. And I'm sure there'll be a fringe Democrat who does that to somebody in the Democratic Party. It's going to happen. It's unfortunate. The thing we have to do is, while we accept the accounts of people making accusations, we also have to verify. There are 2 anonymous accusations against Franken saying he acted inappropriately to him. Grab their ass. The organization reporting this is the Huffington Post. They're not exactly a bastion of journalism here. So I'm not inclined to trust them on this. Doesn't mean the allegations are false, but Huffington Post doesn't always do due diligence. And they have the annoying habit of running woo stories in various sections. And, I had been concerned about Franken resigning because we could potentially lose a Democrat seat in Congress, and we certainly need all the Democrats in Congress we can get right now, or anybody who's not a fucking Republican. And I don't know how Minnesota's laws work, because each state determines how they replace a senator who leaves before the end of their term. Some states, there's a special election. Some states, the replacement is appointed by the governor. Other states, I think the legislature picks somebody. But whomever it is, odds are in Minnesota that the replacement would be a Democrat. So Franken could actually resign, and that may be the best thing for him to do, without us having to worry that, that seat's going to go to Republican. And I hate that we find ourselves in a situation where we're trying to figure out whether somebody's statements that they were assaulted by another person are believable or not. And I'm not even going to get into the whole thing where they tweeted the photos of the first accuser against Franken, showing that, she was grabbing the ass of the guitar player and None of that matters because say everything happened the way that she said it happened. She's there. She's to give a performance. She's going to act, happy and cheerful, etc., etc. So she's not going to give out an impression that something bad happened to her because her job is to be a performer and to perform. Show must go on and all that. It is going to be an awkward situation, at least until the investigation by the Senate Ethics Committee gets done, which may or may not be reliable. After all, there are a number of people who are either members of Congress or aides to members of Congress who've come out and said that they were sexually harassed by people in Congress. So, that ethics review may just be a cover-up of Franken actually behaving badly. Everybody is going to have to decide for themselves. And again, I really hate that we're in this kind of situation because we should be able to trust somebody making an accusation. Okay, I have blathered on too much. And I have got to get this thing edited before I go to work, so all you're getting on the political side is me rambling about some issues. I thank everybody for listening, and I know I've thrown off the schedule with alternating on the Apocrypha and news. Skullbeard and I have more episodes in the can, so I'll try to get one out this week. I know I said I was going to get this out before today, but that didn't happen. However, I will be back at work, so I'll be in a locked schedule. So it's actually easier in that situation, even though I'm gone for 8 hours a day and asleep for 8 hours a day, to get something cut and edited. So I will see you then, and that one, when it goes up, will be a freebie for the Patreon subscribers, since it will actually be a bonus episode and not one that goes up on the regular day. Again, you only get charged, at the most you'll ever be charged if you're Patreon supporters, for 4.5 episodes a month. I'm not going to charge for every episode I put up. That's not fair to you guys, because you all budget for whatever, and I'm not going to blow your budget, because I know what it's like to have your budget suddenly blown by some asshole.
That's it for this episode of The Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, as well as just about anywhere else podcasts can be found. Many of the episodes are also on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter. @TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle. It's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can support it via Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fosnuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.